In the previous episode, we reviewed some basic workflow when using the Laravel extension. So if I run PHP unit, yeah, we get green. Okay, but sometimes what you're testing actually makes use of JavaScript. Maybe you're making AJAX calls, or maybe there's some animation, or any number of things that require JavaScript in order to work. Well, we can't test that using the Laravel extension or Symfony's DOM crawler. Instead, we really do want a browser to be running. So in those situations, we'll be using the Selenium extension. And the cool thing is, the API is almost identical. In fact, it is identical to the Laravel extension, but there are a handful of additional methods that you can call, which would be specific to using a browser. Okay, so why don't we create tests? We could call this acceptance if you want, and we'll use that same auth test idea here, just to show you the differences. So in this case, remember, we were using the Laravel extension, we extended test case, and then test case extended the Laravel extension. Okay, here's how this one's going to be different. If I open this up, I'll add our test case. We'll call this auth2 test. And now we'll extend the Selenium specific extension. All right. And let's see. Let's review something really basic. It visits the registration page. Okay, don't forget, the API is identical. So I can say this visit auth/register, and let's see what we get here. If I switch to the terminal, we will run PHP unit on the acceptance folder, and let's see what happens. Well, instantly it fails, but I give you a pretty good indication as to what the next step is. In this case, we're trying to work with Selenium, but you didn't have the Selenium server up and running. If we switch over to Chrome and visit seleniumhq.org, all you have to do is visit the download page and download the latest Selenium server. In this case, it's 2.4.5. So you will fetch that, and really you can place it anywhere. You can put it in your project root if you want to, or you could even put it in your home directory. It's up to you. Now, in this case, if I list our files, you can see that I've saved it directly to this project. So now we just have to boot it up. Java-jar Selenium, and I will use tab completion here, and that's it. Now, simply open up a new tab. We run it. So take a look. Now you can see Firefox open and close really quickly because there wasn't anything for it to do. Why don't we sit around for just a minute so that you can see a bit better. This method is specific to the Selenium extension. Wait, and then you provide the number of milliseconds. Now, real quick, if you're curious, you can look at any of the additional methods for this extension by looking at the JavaScript-aware emulator. So anyways, let's run this again, and now Firefox will open, but sit around for 5 seconds in this case. Cool. So we can see the API is virtually identical. That means if we want to register, well, in the previous episode, we created this little registers users trait. And if the API is the same, we should be able to use this, right? Well, yes and then no. Let me show you. If I say this register like we did before, and we'll say credentials equals email, foo@example.com. Okay, let's try to register a user with these credentials. And once again, only for the screencast, we'll sit around for about 3 seconds just so we see it before it closes. All right, so let's import use registers users. And if we run it again, it fails. So if we scroll up, what's the problem here? Well, call to a member function make on null. So the issue is, within our trait here, well, test dummy and our eloquent user model, well, that assumes some Laravel stuff, right? However, our Selenium test, well, we're not extending the test case, so there's no point where we boot up Laravel, so to speak. And that's because for many of the users of this package, they won't be using Laravel. They'll be using Symfony or vanilla PHP. So in these cases where we want to use Selenium, but we also want to work with Laravel and its facades and things like that, here's what we do. There's a dedicated application trait that we can pull in. And take a look real quick. We have some triggers here to run this on setup. So we boot up a Laravel application. We know to tear it down after the test runs, and we also know how to refresh and create the application. Which means if we go back here, all we have to do is pull that in, like so, and I'm going to alias that to Laravel, and then I can say use Laravel. Okay, so now by importing that, we have access to Laravel's helper functions or Laravel's facades or any of that stuff. That means now, if we run this again, it should work. We open up Firefox and notice we are filling out that form in real time. And at this point, we're just sitting around for a few seconds because we specified as much. So here's another cool thing. Imagine we want to register, and then we want to take a snapshot of wherever we are. This is useful especially for debugging, where something isn't going according to plan, and you just sort of want to see what Selenium is seeing. And maybe you want a snapshot just to give you an indication of what Selenium is seeing. Because remember, in some situations, you won't be staring at the browser as these tests run. You could use something like Phantom.js, where it's happening behind the scenes. So in those situations, we have this method called snap, or snap if you prefer. Register a user and then take a snapshot. Let's run it. Now notice when you use Selenium, admittedly, it's going to be a little bit slower. There's no way around that. It comes with the territory of using an actual browser. But anyways, back in Sublime, this snapshot will be saved by default to the logs directory. So if we take a look, now we can see what the problem was. The first time we ran it, we didn't have a user with this email, but now we do because we didn't clear out the database. And this is something that confuses a lot of people. It's important to remember, in this case, yes, we're pulling in a Laravel instance, so to speak, so we can work with the facades and the configuration and things like that. But remember, when Selenium runs, it's opening a browser, which means that's a separate Laravel instance running from what you have in your editor. This was really confusing for me when I was first learning about this. And what I mean by this is, let's say that when you write a test, you want to start by having a user logged in. Well, if you were using the Laravel extension, you could use the be method, or you could say auth login using ID, and then you pass an ID, right? That will log the user in. However, when you're using Selenium, well, think about it, that wouldn't work. You are logging the user in for this console Laravel instance that we have set up. But that has absolutely nothing to do with the instance of Laravel that is running when Selenium opens up a browser. That makes sense, right? So this means when you use Selenium, don't expect stuff like this to work. That's not what it's for. Instead, it's most useful for things like, I want to clear out or truncate this database table, stuff that has no effect on the actual state of the application. Okay, so let's move on. Why don't we do another one? It sees an alert, just to give you an idea of the workflow here. Well, imagine that we visit maybe page with alert, and we expect to see an alert. Don't forget, once again, if you want to prefix and, you can do that. So, and see an alert, I am an alert. Cool. So let's run our tests. It's going to open up this page, but it fails, of course, right? We don't have a route set up for that. So let's visit routes.php, and we'll say get that route, and then trigger some kind of view. How about this? Return view, and we'll use that same name. Okay, resources, views, .blade.php, and then down here, well, let's leave it as it is. We run it again, and now we'll see the page, which will be blank, but no alert box. That's our next step. So come here, and within a script, we will alert, just to prove that JavaScript is in fact working. So now we run it, let it run, and it works. Perfect. We can even do things like waiting for an element to appear, which is useful when maybe you're making an AJAX call and it takes 1 or 2 seconds to run. Well, we need some way to tell Selenium, wait for that to finish, and then I expect to see this data or this element. I'll give you a quick example of that. Back in our test, well, maybe we visit the page with alert, that's fine, but we want to say wait for element. So I could say wait for element, and maybe the element is simply a box. All right, now I expect to see I am a box. Okay, so you see what we're doing here? We're visiting a page and we're saying wait for an element that has an ID of box to display. But now you're probably thinking, well, how long? The default is 5 seconds. In fact, if you want to take a look at that, let's go to the Selenium extension and say wait for element, and there you go. Wait a total of 5,000 milliseconds. So keep in mind, that doesn't mean we're waiting 5 seconds. We're saying wait a maximum of 5 seconds. So if you don't see box in 5 seconds, then you're free to fail. Or if you want to shorten that, of course you can do so. Okay, so why don't we run this? But real quick, we will hide the alert. Okay, so we run it. Of course, this is going to fail, but you'll see Firefox open up, and now it's just lingering for 5 seconds. Basically, what it's doing is pulling over and over. Did I see that ID? Did I see that ID? Did I see that ID? And if 5 seconds goes by without it seeing it, then it fails, and you have a little message here. So now, if we switch back, why don't we pull in jQuery to be really quick, and then we'll just wait 2 seconds and then add a box here. So why don't we say this? Really quick, set timeout. We're going to wait 2 seconds, and then we'll create a little box here. I am a box, and append that to the body. Basic jQuery, right? So try it, and hopefully this should return green. 1, 2. We saw it. It instantly saw it, so it didn't need to wait another 3 seconds. It could move on immediately. All right, so that's been your brief introduction to the Selenium extension. A few key points here. 1, your Selenium tests are going to be slower. By their very nature, they will be slower. So you want to isolate them in a custom directory. In this case, we're thinking of these as acceptance tests, so that's a good place to run them. That way, when we are running our general Laravel-specific tests within the functional directory, those can trigger really, really fast, and we don't have to run Selenium every single time we trigger our test suite. You can do that a little more intermittently, like before you deploy or as part of the deployment process. Next, create a test, have it extend the Selenium class, and you're ready to use the exact same API as you were using before. Finally, if you do want access to some of Laravel's helpers, especially for situations where maybe you want to empty out a database table or something like that, well, you can pull in the Laravel application trait and then use it. That way you could do things like this. Truncate tables, and we could say db table users truncate, and we could say I want to do this before every test. Setup. Pretty cool, right? Don't forget about these annotations. If you have a setup or a teardown annotation, well, the integrated package is going to track that down and trigger it at the appropriate spot. So in this case, this is sort of like saying setup. But the advantage is, because we're using an annotation, you could have as many of these methods as possible. Or if you have multiple traits, well, just add the annotation and you don't have to worry about syncing everything up or calling parent setup or trying to group a ton of logic into a single method. This is a clean way to go about it. Before every test runs, clear out the users table. Now just remember, if you didn't pull in the Laravel extension, well, PHP unit would know nothing about this DB facade and you'd get an error. I'll show you. If we run it, yeah, it fails. Class DB not found. And that's specifically why we have to pull in the Laravel application trait.